All right, Derek, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast, man. I'm glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Jared.
All right,
It's a
so we're gonna
pleasure.
we're gonna get started right away with some challenges, and I'm gonna throw those to you if you don't mind. So, how about a fitness challenge for everybody listening?
Oh, geez, fitness challenge. I just finished a run, so I'm still kind of sweating a bit. And because I'm like approaching 50 years old, I just don't have it anymore. So it is really mental. And so my wife was a runner, a middle distance runner, and my daughter can run like forever. She's like 11 years old. So what we do is I get a head start, and then there's a
Nice,
trail we run through, and it's about a 3 mile trail, and then they just chase me. Like I get a 1 minute handicap, and then they
nice.
chase me. So we call it the predator run, and the whole idea is I just got to stay ahead of them, and it's stressful. It's really stressful knowing that your 11-year-old can catch you and pass you and talk crap to you. So that's my mental. I was gonna say that's my mental health challenge. That's my mental toughness challenge. It's both really.
Okay, yeah. And is that the norm? Do they normally catch you, or are there some days where you win?
Today I won. Today
Nice.
yeah, I don't know why. Somebody got a stitch or a cramp or something like that. So, yay, it must have been that little concoction I put in their breakfast. But anyways, yeah.
That's really awesome. And how did your daughter get into running?
Well, both of us did. Both mother and I did track, right? My wife and I did
Yeah.
track. So, um,
But was it
you
just
know,
taking her out to the track when you guys are doing stuff or watching and learning? I'm always curious about how people's kids pick up fitness, because I think that's really important these days.
well, I think they just at school they figure out who's fast. Like they do like a run around the school and quite regularly. And I think it's about a kilometer, just over a half mile. And she's always way ahead of everybody. Her and another friend, whose her friend's father played in the NFL and uh,
Wow,
was a tremendous athlete. So like those two are always kind of running and battling it out. So far and away they're just good runners naturally, and then it just put her in a track meet, she wins. And I haven't really spent a lot of time on any technical coaching with her because I just figure whatever, just let her keep improving on her own. So
that's really cool. Really cool.
yeah.
All right, so I'll move to so that's going to be your fitness and mental toughness challenge. So we'll go to book recommend. Or do you want to do a different mental toughness challenge?
The mental toughness challenge for me is just have as many kids as possible. um I got three, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is just trying to get your stuff done. And I do a lot of work from home, so there's a lot of distractions, and even my wife's like, I don't know how you like get stuff done when the kids are going nuts in the background. I'm like, yeah, well, it's a learn thing, right? So it's trying to keep track of your own stuff and then keeping track of somebody else's stuff, and making sure they're accountable and you're accountable. That's tough.
Oh,
That's
for
tough.
sure.
Like, so
I'm at the 3 kid mark myself too. What are the ages of your children?
13, 11, and 5. So we got a big break between the
Nice.
second and third. So yeah, no, and doing that all over again, it's kind of like a video game where you get killed and you got to start over again. You got to go through this phase, and I got to go through this phase again. I hated this phase, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's where we're at right now. So my youngest, so I have a 6 year old, about to be 4 year old, and now a 3 month old, about to be 4 month old. And yeah, we kind of got that long break, from longish break from 2 to 3, and it was kind of like, yeah, oh yeah, you don't sleep that well, and you're not as sharp mentally, and all that stuff when the new baby gets here that we're going through right now. But it's fun
Oh yeah, it's the biggest challenge I think you'll ever have, really. Um, but it's probably also the most rewarding, right? So
for sure, for sure. All right, now let's get to a book recommendation. Now, this can be really anything, maybe an impactful book in your life, or it could just be something you've read recently, anything you feel like recommending.
the one that was given to me recently that I'm reading is called The Entrepreneurial You, and it was by a friend of mine that I help out, Hunter Charneski. He's like, here, you got to read this book, because I'm doing some work on online courses and trying to develop some resources for people. So, and just I think it's when I'm working with and advising strength and conditioning coaches and coaches in general, I think it's imperative for them to develop skill sets beyond what they're really doing on a day-to-day basis. So, I was just got back from the NSCA national conference, and you talk to people about what job they're in, maybe they feel like they want to move into something else, or it feels a little unstable, or there could be a coaching change. And I think a lot, and then the other side of it is you talk to people who are in the private sector and the challenges they have and how it forces them to really think different about aspects of their professional development and, their future. So I think if somebody is in like working for a team or a university, I always tell them, like, you got to prepare yourself for the eventuality that maybe you'll have to move into some other area or assume a different position. So developing yourself as a professional on many levels, I think is really important. So that's what I got out of this book. And I think, I wish it was a more stable environment for people, a more stable profession, but it really isn't. But you got to be able to flip that and go, how can I make this advantageous for myself? How can I put myself in a position where I'm always going to be secure and adaptable and all that? So that's what I got out of that book.
Okay, that's awesome, and I'll definitely check that out. As an entrepreneur myself, I think that's something I definitely want to check out. And you're right, the industry in general can be very fluid, and you really have to build yourself up almost as a personal brand to some degree, to where you can, move to the next thing, or if you're to get fired because the team wasn't doing well or whatever, there's a lot of instability depending on where you're at in this career field. So I think that's great. I'll definitely check that out. Now,
Yep.
If you don't mind, if you could give everyone listening kind of a background, you can go back as far as you'd like it, any athletic background, coaching background, up to, kind of today and what you're doing.
Like a reference my NSCA presentation again, and a lot of my stuff, I always talk about the importance of actually sprinting and training it and working on the mechanics. So one of the slides I have is like, why do I have this connection to sprinting? And I think when I was young, just like my kids now, I was always one of the faster kids, right? Sports day, whatever, you're used to winning. And when you play a sport, you're used to being able to get to the ball faster or just outrun people for whatever reason. And early on, I found out that was a real commodity. Like if you're fast, and for the most part, you're thanking your parents and the genetic side of it, right? You weren't coached in how to do that. And then once you get to a certain point where you kind of peak out relying on talent alone, then you got to work on things a little more, and you have to think about, okay, how do I get technically better, or how do I get in better shape? And I think, when I got to that point, I don't think there are some great things about how I was coached as an athlete, and there are some things where I thought I could have been better. And one of the areas I could have been better was just the technical execution and the planning of speed training. And so I also was coaching at a very early age during the summers, working with youth athletes. So I was coaching sprinting and jumping by the time I was about 18 years old. And so now it's been it's been like 30 plus years, 31 years. And so that's really been the focus of my development as a coach, whether it was working as a track coach in a college environment, and then eventually working as a strength and conditioning coach in a college environment, in a private sector environment. And that's always been my focus, is how do we work on getting faster? Because it is a commodity, and it's something that, people can benefit from significantly. Is it the be all end all? Like, is it going to decide, whether or not you're a champion or, no, but it certainly helps, all things being equal. I mean, obviously you have to focus on your skill in your sport, and other aspects, but being able to move quickly is something that I've really focused on. And then because of that, now that I'm working in professional sport and particularly with like NFL, NBA, you're finding that injuries are becoming a bigger part of the equation. So people are missing seasons, and you get to the playoffs and so pulls a hamstring in a key series, and then, ultimately decides the fate of the team. So that's a bigger part of the work that I'm doing now is, okay, how do we look at the sprinting equation, and how does that address some of these issues, whether it's hamstring return to play. I'm doing some work with a quarterback in the CFL who has coming off a ACL surgery from the fall, and sprinting was the base there too of assessment and of the return to play process. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. That's been the evolution of being an athlete, coaching, and now being more of a consultant and educator. So
That's very cool. So I think maybe I'll start in that order. And I'd love to know, from all of your experience and background, if we can kind of start at a more tactical level, are there any misconceptions about building speed in an athlete you've seen from maybe the coaching community or coaches in general that you'd like to squash, or you just think, are improper training or ideas?
There's a couple of things. One is when people discuss sprint training or speed training, I think there's a bit of a disconnect on what that actually should look like. And I think there's always an emphasis on work. Like, okay, what's the total amount of work that we're doing? How busy do we look? What is the perception of the work being done by either the athlete, the coach themselves, or external parties like the head coach or whatever, management, head office, whoever, the parents. And there's always this assumption that getting better involves a lot of work. And I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying how you divide up that work and the quality of work and the nature of the work is more important most of the time than the total amount, because it's easy to do a lot of work. Any fool can do a lot of work, right? But in order to get faster, there's technical components, there's energy system considerations, there's neurological, training, motor learning involved. So as soon as skill and recovery become issues, then now you have to have a more precise approach. And I think that's the problem right now is a lot of people will tell me, yes, we are advocates of speed training. We do what you do. And then you go and watch, and they're not taking enough time for recovery, and they're not focusing on mechanics like they should. And, there's one coach trying to coach 40 guys and how to sprint.
Right.
And that's just not going to work. I don't care how you do it. You're better off working with 3 people at a time, getting some key things done, or 6 people, and then getting the next row of guys and work on them, rather than trying to just run 40 guys at once. But that seems to be where it's headed. And so, there's a whole bunch of areas we can get into, but you could get into this idea that, it's all about intensity and it's all about culture, and it's all about, like you said, mental toughness. And then that starts to eke into the equation as well. And like, if I scream louder and everybody looks like we're doing it as a sort of a military training type approach, then that'll make somebody faster. No, it doesn't, so, that's the thing. A lot of people will kind of talk the talk about, yes, we do sprint training, we do speed training, but when it comes down to walking the walk, the implementation doesn't look like what they were talking about. And I think until, we start to block out all these other things, these other influences and perceptions, we won't really accomplish what we need to accomplish from a speed point of view. There's a lot of good people doing good things. But I would say, when I look at the industry as a whole, that's an area where we're deficient. We're seriously deficient. Like, you'll go on YouTube and you see people talk about, yeah, we're really about speed. But then you never see them sprint. You see them doing drills on a wall. You see them doing stuff in the weight room. You see them doing, like, somebody sent me something, somebody's doing balance work. I'm like, these have nothing to do with running fast. Show me you're running. Show me the running. Show me the meat, right? And that's where it falls apart. And I don't understand why, but the only thing I can go back to is these people were never properly taught, or 2, they were never actually put on the spot and lined up against other people and said, okay, this is your job. You have to run faster than this guy. Because if it came down to that, then we'd figure out who knew how to train people properly and who knows what they're doing. But I think in team sports, it's easy to hide, right? It's easy to hide, behind talent, behind, the game itself, right? So, I threw a lot of stuff in there, but I think there's a lot of issues right now with speed training and training in general.
And I think that can happen. You're talking about coaches training a lot of people. They're in that talent factor you're talking about is they maybe an athlete's getting marginally faster, but the coach may be nowhere near optimally training that athlete because they're just like you said running drills without not doing anything properly. They have a ton of genetic potential and athletic potential, so they do get faster, but it's not really because of what the program is doing or what the coach is doing for that athlete. And one thing you mentioned was recovery. I wanted to know if you were talking about like in a session, like not enough recovery time between efforts, or are you talking about recovery overall, like sleep, hydration, nutrition, like on a bigger scale when you're talking about recovery?
I mean, it's everything. It's everything. It's like the recovery between repetitions, the
Yeah,
recovery between sets, between sessions, between weeks, between cycles, right? I just don't think there's enough time taken to really consolidate the improvements, right? And if we go back to what you said about people are getting faster, I think there was a study done in the NCAA that found that people were getting stronger, but people weren't getting faster,
right.
right? So that's a problem.
Yeah,
That's a problem. Like, I don't care. Like, if NCAA competition was about powerlifting and Olympic lifting, great. Those strength coaches are doing a good job, but it's not. It's basketball where you don't lift anybody, and it's football where you got to run to score touchdowns and run to catch passes to score touchdowns. So that is a serious problem, and we have to look at ourselves and go, we're not doing our jobs, right? Okay, great. You made somebody really strong. That's awesome. But, they're a tennis player. They're a collegiate tennis player. What does that have to do with anything? So, yeah, I just think, all of these factors of, again, maybe social media is making it worse, but it should look a certain way. Like, it should look like people are busy. It should look like it sound like there's loud music. It should look like, people are screaming and yelling and high-fiving and chest bumping and all that. But what are the results? And don't tell me like, oh, this team, is won the national championship and all that. Obviously those results count, but is that because of the strength and conditioning, or is it because of the recruiting and maybe the
right,
strategic, moves that they're making on the field? Everybody wants to say that just because this team has won, the Golden State Warriors, and I know some of the people who work on the staff in the Golden State Warriors, and they're good people, but is it because that's why they're winning? Well, it's no, they got all these great players playing for them, right?
right,
And even LeBron James knows that, right? Like, okay, I'm not winning because our strength coach sucks. We're not winning because I don't have enough good guys around me, right, to help out.
right.
So that's why he moves around, right? So I think you have to really reduce it down to its bare components and go, what is working, what is not. And I don't want to say that good strength and conditioning and good speed training is not going to matter. It's going to matter. Like, like I said, like in the injury prevention side and bringing people back, certainly that's going to make a huge difference. But just because we front squat versus back squat, is that going to make a difference? Absolutely not. So.
And I have a question about strength in general, and I'm not talking about particular weights or percentages of body weight or anything like that. But do you think there is a point where strength, a certain level of strength or beyond a certain level of strength, is no longer really beneficial to speed?
Certainly. Like, and then we have to draw distinctions between what we consider strength, right? Strength is a very broad term. Does it mean how much weight you can lift? Does it mean how you can handle somebody in a physical confrontation? Does it mean, how you get out of the starting blocks and how you accelerate, and how you can repeat that? So I think it's imperative for us to define what strength means, because right now strength means how much do you squat, how much do you bench press, how much do you power clean? And I don't necessarily agree with that assessment of strength. Strength can be, you can develop strength in the lower body by, plyometrics, by our jumps, and you can do it with hill runs or resisted runs. And so there's so many different ways we can improve strength. So saying like, does somebody top out in strength, and that doesn't contribute to speed at a certain point? Yes, but it varies by modality, right? So if somebody can squat, 2 times or 1.5 times their body weight, is that enough? And I'm sure you could probably go through 100-meter champions and find people who fit that bill where, yeah, they did 1.5 times and that was good. And then the guy who did 3 times his body weight, we never heard of him in terms of his sprint abilities, right? So yes, there's a point of diminishing returns, but just because he can't squat a lot of weight, does that mean he's not strong? And I would argue that no, he is probably pretty strong. It's just not in that sort of biased exercise, right? Both of us could argue like, what's a stronger horse, right? Is it a Clydesdale or is it a thoroughbred? Well, if you're pulling carts, it's going to be the Clydesdale, right? Or carriages, right? But, if you get kicked by a thoroughbred, you're going to be like, that's a pretty strong horse, right? As you examine the bone fragments in your chest. So it really depends on how you define these things. But the final analysis is the person running faster. I don't care what
Right.
measure of strength you have. If you have somebody who's running 9.8 seconds and somebody's running 10.2 seconds, I'm going to say the guy, who runs 9.8 has, better strength, specific strength for his event than the guy's running 10.2. So it doesn't matter what he can squat or bench press. You're still running 10.2. So,
And going back to kind of what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, where maybe being a child, you just happen to be a little bit faster than everyone else. I know I was actually in that category with growing up, and I had natural speed. It tapered off once I got to college level stuff. Like my genetics weren't going to beat those, the guys who were like really high caliber, and I realized I would actually have to train and put in the work. So where do you think, I guess, genetic potential does drop off? Not necessarily in time frame, not like I said in college or whatever, but I mean, how much extra do you think that you can get from a really solid, training program, specifically training for speed? Because you said like a lot of coaches aren't doing it properly right now. Like, how much do you think we could be improving athletes beyond genetic potential, and how much does genetic potential really play into speed overall?
it's huge. Obviously, there's, you have to have the certain fiber type and the certain, the limb length and the tendons have to be attached a certain way for you to optimize, your levers. But, you know, I think a lot of the time we haven't really exhausted the training side in terms of, are we optimizing mechanics for this person? Do we have a good combination of training elements to support their speed training? And then are they doing good speed training in their speed programming in their training as well? And most of the time when you examine things, there's a lot of deficiencies and people aren't able to reach their potential. And there might be one time when they run really well or look really fast, but are they able to sustain that? Because if you haven't surrounded them with the right training, it's not going to be sustainable. Whatever peak that they like, a lot of people will peak out in high school, and then the workloads get so high, and maybe they go to college and they focus too much on strength training, and then the thing that made them actually useful was the running that they did in high school because they weren't over inundated with this amazing strength program, right? And it takes them away from what they're good at. So I think the training piece is important because it does help to, one, solidify the talent that you have, and then kind of, push you up from that point. There's a lot of people who are really talented who probably didn't have, and a lot of them are in the NFL, who probably didn't have great strength programs or well-organized strength and conditioning programs, but just because they're very talented athletically and, maybe they're fast enough. Like you always look at the NFL combine and go, oh, that guy ran 4.2. He's going to be amazing in the NFL, right? And then they get there, they get injured, they can't catch, they have all these other issues, right? So obviously you want to be in the ballpark. The best receivers in the NFL weren't posting the best 40-yard dash times, but they're in the ballpark. So if you look at Jerry Rice, they say, oh, he ran I don't know what they said, he ran 4.7 or something, but you could tell he was fast. I don't care what his 40 time was at the time. You can tell this guy had breakaway speed, and maybe they just weren't measuring it the right way. Antonio Brown, he's fast enough, like he is in that area, 4 or 5, whatever, where he can be an effective receiver. Now, if you make them faster, will it make a difference? I don't know. Like with Kansas City, Tyreek Hill is a good example where he makes plays because he's got very good linear speed abilities. And he was a track athlete in college. And I know for a fact that he still runs some of the same distances in training in the off season. So that's, he has talent, but he's also making sure he nurtures that talent to help him in his game. But I think you want people in the ballpark. I think you want to work on, qualities and training that maintain that ability. Because I think a lot of people, if you don't train it, they will fall off. They will get worse, right? Yes, you have the talent, but if you're doing long distance running and, 15 reps in your squats and, you're not sprinting, you will get slower. I guarantee it. And you potentially could get injured. So, and I think for me, that's the critical element too, is like, if you don't sprint properly in training, you're probably going to get injured. And then that's how your career is going to end. You're going to have, multiple hamstring injuries. You could have some other soft tissue injuries related to your lack of preparation. And then, that's where things will fall apart. It's not that you get slow and then you're totally irrelevant. Usually injury starts to be part of that equation as well. So that's where I'm pushing it is, yes, you're talented. Let's keep doing some sprinting. Do I need you to get faster, Jerry Rice or Antonio Brown? No, you're doing fine. But I do need you to do some sprinting to stay healthy, right? And put yourself in a position to be successful. So,
okay, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think, to be honest, if you were to just grab an average Joe out of a desk job and tell them to go sprint 400 meters, the chance of them getting injured is, pretty high, just because it's not happening in general. And is that something that, a lot of people I think have misconceptions about age. Now, I think there is truth to it. But do you think if, say, an average human being had regular sprint training in their weekly protocol, do you think that it would be easier for them to not get injured, going into 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, later into their training age?
Yeah, I just think there's a reason to do something, relatively maximally as you get older, because, we move away from those things, right? Like our bodies age in a certain way for a reason, obviously. Like, we don't want to be doing parkour when we're 60 because, that's not good, right? Right. We're putting ourselves in danger. You're going to break something, then it's downhill from there. But that doesn't mean you can't do things that are stressful, right? So you can still lift relatively heavy. You can still push yourself in aerobic activities. You can still, do some acceleration and some sprinting. You're not going to the track and running repeat hundreds, but you can run 20 yards or, because if you don't, I guarantee you'll get worse, right? And you'll take yourself out of that, ability, right, really quickly. And I think if, you watch Animal Kingdom or National Geographic, you see the lion, he's like watching the herd and going, okay, which one's straggling behind, right? That's the one I'm going for. And I think that's a metaphor for life. If you don't keep up, you're going to be naturally selected out, whether it's your health, whether it's your mental health. Like I think we're so used to chronic stressors that there's not enough acute stressors in our life to really kind of balance things out. And I think that's a problem with people's general health and mental health now, is there's not enough things that are stressing us in the right way, right? So that we keep adapting and we keep, dividing the cells efficiently and all that. So, all the adults that I advise, the general population people, I want them doing something intense, whether it's throwing something or doing some hill sprints or maybe doing something in the weight room. And it's relatively safe if you do it, probably the worst thing that could happen is you get a bit of a muscle strain. But it's probably safer than trying to do Olympic weightlifting in a group environment with average technique where you could drop a weight on yourself or, so, for me, that's my mode of choice, right?
Right.
Let's get out there and do some sprints.
Yeah, I think it is that simple sometimes. You're as long as you keep your body a well-oiled machine, you'll be able to do these things. And like you said, gauging intensity off of what you're capable of at that time. Now, I'd love to kind of transition here to just talking a little bit more about what you're doing in the consulting field. Very interesting to me. I would just love to know kind of who you're consulting and kind of what you're consulting them on. I'd love to know kind of some of you get a great opportunity to see bigger picture things in consulting, which I think is really cool. So I'd love to pick your brain on that a little bit. If you'd start with maybe how you kind of get started into it, and what are some of the things that you're consulting people on, or I would kind of tie back into maybe issues or problems they might be having, but I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I think, like anything, you need to get to know people, right? Because there has to be a trust around that as well. So, physically getting out and meeting people, whether it's, presenting at a conference, does help. But then, okay, how do I present at a conference? Well, you have to start putting material out that grabs people's attention or it makes people think. So for me, it was, getting to know people, but it was also writing and putting my thoughts out and saying, this is what I think, about this particular issue, whether it's getting faster, whether it's planning for a team, whether it's addressing some of the injury issues. And there, people get to see your content and your information and your thought process, and they go, oh, okay, now I want to learn more about that. That makes sense to me. And you're not given, when you write these articles, you're not giving away the farm, right? You're saying, here's something to consider conceptually. Here's maybe a case study that I did, that worked really well, or a couple of those. And then you kind of get people thinking, okay, that sounds legitimate. That sounds credible. I want to learn more, and I want to learn it in regards to what I'm doing with my team or my athlete. And then that's really how I think it has taken off for me, is that I've kind of, there's athletes you work with and there's teams you work with, and you go, yeah, this is what I did. And people can make their assessment or assumption on what your contribution was. But then you also you can't just say, I work with this athlete, right? Like, hey, okay, well, what the hell did you do, right? Did you make them protein shakes, or did you
Yeah.
actually train them, right? Because that, people don't really articulate that. So if you start laying out what you actually did, and why you did it, the reasons behind why you did it, and this was the success, and sometimes this was the failure, and you're pretty transparent about it, people will kind of gain some trust in your ability. And then you can, if you have video to support what you've done and you see things, that's very helpful as well. And so that's all I'm trying to do even now, is say, this is what I think. You kind of put your flag in the ground and you go, this is my position. This is what I think works. Here are some examples of it working. And then, people will call and people will want to hear more. And then if you get a chance to present, like I have a number of times to present at the NFL Combine to all the teams and all the athletic trainers and medical staff, that adds to your credibility. And then you have conversations with those people and gain some trust, and then you can get more jobs and projects. And so that's how, for me, it's worked out. And most of the time, the work that I'm providing input on would be something very general, like how do I organize a plan for the off season or in season? What are some things that I would do with the schedule if we have a Monday night game versus a Thursday game versus we have to fly to London to play a game or go to Mexico to play a game? So those planning issues and those general issues are things that I'm involved with a lot. The other part of it is somebody has a specific injury. How do we address that? Somebody has torn an Achilles. How do we bring them back in a safe and effective and expedient manner? Somebody has a hamstring. We've had some issues with this basketball player with their ACL. How would you use electrical stimulation as part of that RTP process? And so it goes from very general to very specific. And so I think if you want to be involved in the consulting side, there's you can be a generalist, you can be a physiologist, you can talk about acute and chronic loads and all that. But at the same time, for me, I found I've been more successful because I have very, very precise knowledge in a couple of areas. So whether it's speed training, hamstring RTP, electrical muscle stimulation, those are things that I've spent a lot of time on, and I have a significant expertise above and beyond a lot of other people. So that's what they hone in on. And you can't just be, I'm a weightlifting coach. Well, everybody is, right? So
Right.
How do you distinguish yourself? How do you distinguish your skill set? And I think that's the important part. And until you do that, you're not going to be asked to present. You're not going to be asked to be a consultant and share your ideas because, for the most part, most people think they know the general stuff pretty good. Some people do. Some people could use some work on it, but the specific stuff really will set you apart. What do you specifically do? What is your niche?
Right.
And then what it becomes is, okay, you have this niche, and then how do you diversify that niche a bit so that it's not just always the same solution, which is easy. It's very easy because every case is going to be individual, and there's going to be different nuances that you have to be able to make your recommendation fit. So, that's the constant challenge is how do I stay relevant? And you don't stay relevant by getting more followers on Instagram and Twitter. You stay relevant by providing good information and getting results and providing solutions. So,
and that's one thing I've loved about this conversation so far is, we could talk about energy system training and recovery and mechanics and all that stuff, but I love that you keep coming back to the fact that basically if you're not getting people results, like it doesn't matter, like that's the only thing that you can truly do to set yourself apart. I mean, everyone should be getting people results if you call yourself a coach in any capacity, but that's what speaks the biggest. And I really think that's awesome because you have so much knowledge, experience, education, and everything, but
doesn't matter. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. It's all about results and what you can do for your teams, your athletes, so on and so forth.
Yeah, because there's all this talk about like, oh, we have to do this exercise for hamstring injury prevention, the Nordic this, Nordic that, and which is great. Hey, great, do that, right? But what we're seeing now is that all the teams are doing this, and hamstring injuries aren't going down, right? So we have to look. I would love to have a magic, bullet or magic pill, and hamstrings are eradicated, hamstring injuries are eradicated, but that's not going to happen because there are individual circumstances and characteristics that determine why somebody has a hamstring pull, right? That you have to look at on an individual basis and solve for that person. You can't solve it by just giving somebody a blanket solution. It doesn't work that way. Humans are very complex, right? We don't behave linearly. We're non-linear beings, right? So as soon as you understand that, then you have an open conceptual approach that you come in and you go, okay, what are you doing for this? What is your history? What does your running look like? Right. And I don't hear that enough. You have all these people talk about hamstring solutions. And the first thing is, well, what do they move like? What are their movement patterns that could be dictating this problem? So until you do that and you break it down on an individual basis, you're still going to have problems.
And the RTP work you do, is that, do you do general and specific, like giving team recommendations on stuff that they could do down to helping specific athletes? What do you do in that capacity?
Yeah, like the easiest thing is always, okay, you guys having hamstring problems. What are you doing for training, right? And you find out they're not doing a lot of acceleration programming at, at least 90% of max whatever their best time at a certain distance. So, okay, you guys aren't sprinting, but you have to sprint as part of your game, and you're getting all this exposure to stress, and you're not addressing it. So that's an easy one. Like, and there's an NFL team that I work with who I think they would have 7 or 8 on average. You have 7 or 8 hamstring strains per year per team, right? And then we implement some very basic things like we need you to accelerate this much in off season. We need you to do it, continue it during the season. And that number's down to 1 or 2 per year, which is significant. Like, I don't care what you say.
That's huge.
That's significant, right? The last 3 years, those numbers have come down. And guess what? I've been working with them the last 3 years. So maybe it was just an accident, but I doubt it. So you can have very general changes that can have profound results. And then, and if you do that, then, I'm kind of cannibalizing my own business. But if you do that very general recommendation, they don't have hamstring injuries, you don't get called in to do the specific stuff. But there are teams that don't have that global comprehensive approach, and they're going to have recurring hamstring problems. So that, business development for me on another end. So I don't mind coming in and then dealing with that individual scenario. And then obviously a lot of the recommendations beyond that particular situation are going to be, in future, this athlete has to do this. I need you to do this many times per week to make sure that, that's in check. So, it goes back and forth, between specific and general, and on need. It's all based on need. So.
Right. Perfect. Well, I appreciate all the information. I want to move to the quick fire questions if you're ready.
Oh, sure.
What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
I mean, it's tough to say because the hardest workout is probably the one that's least desirable, right? Like the one that I don't like doing, because I've done a lot of hard workouts where, you're into it. Like we used to do a lot of, like I used to do long jump and triple jump. So we used to do a lot of plyos, right? Which was hard, a lot of jumps, a lot of reps, which took a toll on your body, but it was fun, right? So I didn't perceive that as hard. Whereas if you sent me on, like there was this, out in Vancouver, there's this beach that has I can't remember how long the climb is, but it's almost like a vertical climb it took us about 55 seconds to sprint up this set of stairs. And we did that 3 times. And every time you would just pass out at the top, your body would be like, in lactic overload and just like a body cramp. And then you'd like fall back down the hill and then you'd do it again. And you just felt horrible. And but that wasn't fun, and it hurt like hell. And I don't even think it applied to what we were doing. Like I don't need to run up a hill for 50 seconds to be a better long jumper or triple jumper, right? So that was probably like the toughest, when that this has nothing to do with my success, but we're forced to do it and it hurts. Right. Those are the ones that kill you. So
awesome. All right, so that kind of maybe ties into the next question a little bit. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
There's obviously no solitary activity, but I think, mental toughness is about being presented with a challenge, obviously dealing with some adversity, but also getting through it, right? Mm-hmm. So nobody wants to be put in a situation where they're set up to fail. That's not mental toughness. That's futility. So I think for me, it's being presented with a challenge where you're giving the opportunity to succeed, or a chance to succeed. And along the way, it should be tough. It should be difficult. But if you persist and you're given the right information on how to get through it, you succeed. And then you go, it's like public speaking, right? Public speaking, the first time you do it, is mentally draining and stressful. And it's probably the worst thing for a lot of people. But then as you do it more, and, maybe you start with a small audience and a short presentation, and then it just expands from there. And then then you can do like 10,000 people in front of you, do an hour and a half lecture. That's different. So it's all about progression, I think. It's not about putting people in horrible, you're not waterboarding people to make them mentally tough. Right. You're breaking somebody there. So you're giving them an opportunity to succeed in a progressive manner. That's my definition.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, pushing people to their threshold, not some ill-conceived or notion of what a threshold should be. I think that's a really good point, because your definition of stress could be different to mine versus the next person. So I think that's awesome. All right, if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I mean, for me, it's just open space. Like it's just having the space to do what I need to do, whether it's indoor or outdoor. If I don't have the space, my job has always been to make people faster and do the running piece. So I need space. I need, good weather. I need, and if it's not outdoors, then indoor, a protected space indoor. So, and then from there, I can take off my shoes and use them as cones for somebody. I can, obviously a stopwatch would be nice. But there's other ways to kind of get a sense of how fast people are going. But that's it. That's the thing for me. If somebody talks about a gym space or a weight room, everybody's obsessing about the equipment and the racks and the weights and the logos on the racks. Like we need open space. We need open space to work with. And it should fit the requirements of the sport at the very least, if not beyond that. That's the simplest answer I can give you. I can't, it'd be nice to have a medicine ball too, but that's the thing. Like we are given everything that we're going to deal with for the most part, already. Like, the space requirement, we can build velocity over a longer distance. So we can get different ground contact times from sprinting, from acceleration to max velocity. We can use gravity to do jumps, right? And load differently. I mean, that's how, you become innovative, is you use what you have and you come up with different strategies. So yeah, it's easy. Just have space.
Awesome. Now the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended.
The best advice I have is you have to be, I think for me, you have to be put in a situation where you're given responsibility over the welfare of others. And I think some people can fail horribly at that, right? So the parenting example is always important to me. Like if I'm in charge of these, you and I are in charge of 3 young humans, right?
Right.
So you have to make decisions based on the welfare of those individuals. And sometimes that means that you have to make good decisions about your own welfare, right? Because you have to earn money, you have to be healthy so that you can take care of these individuals. And then as part of that, your job is to eventually make those humans self-sufficient and make good decisions on their own. So the way, you can't be a better human by not interacting with people, right? And having some accountability and responsibility. So if you put yourself in a position where you have to take care of people, I think that's probably the best way to be a better human. You can't read about it. You can't think about it. You just have to do it. And then there has to be this constant self-awareness and reassessment of what your role is. And I think that's the problem right now with the industry and strength and conditioning, especially at, say the collegiate level or high school level, is people are given that responsibility. And I don't think they're using it appropriately. I think they think, oh, I got to make these people tougher, so I have to be this kind of person to them. And I think that's absolutely wrong. There's ways, like, we talked about mental toughness. There's ways that you can make people mentally tough without it being abusive. Like it's very easy. And you don't have to be a cartoon character. You don't have to be yelling and screaming the whole time. And to some degree, you might be putting people in harm's way by not focusing on what you need to focus on, the technique, the recovery that we talked about, and making sure that people are in their best possible position to improve. So that for me is the best way, to be a better human being, is put yourself in a situation where you're responsible for the welfare of others, and then constantly check yourself, constantly, like ask them how they're doing. Ask others, how do you think I'm doing? And until you do that, until you expose yourself and make yourself transparent, you can't really understand what impact you're having, because even then, if you're that loud, obnoxious person and you say, oh, what do you think? How do you think I'm doing? People are going to say, yeah, you're doing fine. You're doing a good job. You're doing a good job, coach. They just want to get out of the room and get away from you. Right. So they're going to lie to you. Right. So
yeah, I think a lot of misconceptions in coaching, I would say a lot of misconception on what leadership looks like or should be. And it might be good on coaches to probably study that just as much as they they do their sport or their technique or anything else. Because yeah, like it's one of the most challenging things you'll ever do. Being responsible for the welfare of another human being, or just that responsibility. And you learn a lot about yourself in that process. How you handle yourself under stress, how you react to people, and some people they're not cut out for it, or they just haven't developed the skill, should I say. I don't believe anyone's not fully cut out for something or not cut out for something. I think you can always learn, but there's a huge space there for improvement for most everyone.
Yeah, because it's, again, you're kind of the product of your upbringing too, right? So, any faults that you have, could be placed on the person that coached you or brought you up or educated you or parented you, right? So, but that's not a free pass. That's not an excuse.
Right.
So, because again, if you're, again, self-evaluating and comparing, and they say, oh, you shouldn't compare yourself to others, but sometimes you need to, right? Like, okay, what are those people doing? What results are they getting? How are they treating people? How did those people turn out? And there's nothing wrong with comparing yourself. It's just, you got to do it in a healthy way to kind of make yourself a better person. And so, who knows? I mean, I'm constantly, I think one of the reasons that maybe why I'm relatively successful is that I'm my own worst critic in terms of, am I doing this right? I do a presentation, I'll record it, and then I'll watch it again and make sure, okay, I could be better at that. I could have made that clearer, that point clearer, because I didn't really understand even what I'm saying. So, and I think as long as you do that, most successful people are pretty good about evaluating themselves.
Yeah.
And being very self-critical. You don't want to be self-critical to the point that you're creating anxiety.
There is a line. Yeah, I've found that even with myself, because it's my biggest strength, and it can be, a huge weakness too, because you're talking about anxiety or tearing yourself down too much, or focusing on your negative qualities too much, and never being, thankful, or just realizing, you did do some good in your presentation. If like there was a lot of good there, you just need to fix these. It's not the end of the world if you messed up here and stuff like that. There's a certain level of grace involved in being your own critic.
Yeah, and the whole social media thing is interesting because it's a way to test yourself a bit, put yourself out there, and then, are you crossing the line into narcissism? Are you but at the same time, there's a lot of good people I know who kind of put themselves out there for the right reasons. And, people want people to step up and put themselves out there and be leaders. As long as you're not taking advantage of people. And, because there's going to be a lot of egregious people doing, putting stupid stuff up. And so at some point you got to kind of balance that out. And, my job is to put good information out and not be a moron or an idiot or, a narcissist or whatever. So.
All right. Well, I think that we have covered a lot of stuff here, but I do know that a lot of this we didn't get near as deep as we could have in a lot of these topics. And I know some of the people listening for sure are wanting to check that out. So where could they go to learn more about your work, learn more about what you're doing, and check everything out?
I'm trying to put, again, little pieces of information out via social media like Instagram and Twitter. Like Instagram's interesting because you can put 60 seconds of video.
Yeah.
And I like that because it doesn't get out of hand and people can go, oh, okay, 60 seconds, that's good. That's the attention span is like 18 seconds. But so, on Derek M. Hansen, at Derek M. Hansen for Twitter, Instagram, and even I think Facebook. And then I'm trying to put more content on sprintcoach.com. I have the other site still, strengthpowerspeed.com. I have to add some more stuff into that. But those two sites are kind of where you find older articles and newer information as well. And I have to spend more time, I think, on writing. I got to get away from that. So it's so easy to do video that sometimes you forget I should still be writing articles and things. So, but yeah, both those sites. And yeah, by all means, if you have any questions, you can either hit me up on the social media sites or even just through the contact information on the websites.
Perfect. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. Well, Derek, thank you so much for being on the Better Humanology podcast. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jared. And yeah, anytime you want to do follow up, just let me know.
All right, perfect.